So today we're going to be talking about things we throw away. And I'm not talking about objects so much, although we probably need to clean out our closets. And we may use some of that as an example, and what we talk about may actually apply to that as well. But mostly we're going to be talking about words we throw away, thoughts, maybe paradigms we need to throw away. What do we do with those? How do we handle that? So let's talk about that. Hi, my name is Jeanette Slater, and welcome to this further journey. I'm recording this in Florida. Although I live in northern Indiana, my husband and I have come down to Florida in the middle of the winter to get away from some of the freezing temperatures. And we're staying at this lovely little Airbnb that we stayed at last year. We're here for 2 weeks. We're both working on our creative endeavors. For me, it's the YouTube channel. And we're staying in a little Airbnb. The whole back of the house has a huge deck. That's where I'm sitting right now. And this deck overlooks a private lake. So it's very quiet. It's not a very big lake. And on the other side is a nature preserve. So it's very quiet out here and very peaceful. And we are really enjoying it. We're situated about 1.5 miles, 2 miles out of town on a loop. And this loop is called Jerbiloo Loop. We figure somebody had 3 kids, Jerry, Beatrice, and Louise. And somehow that got to be the name of the little loop that we're on, Jerbiloo. And it's about 1.5 mile loop, which is just great for walking. But one thing I've noticed, so we're kind of out in the boonies, and let's just say it's not Beverly Hills. However, the Beverly Hills hillbillies may have felt very much at home here. So as I'm walking along this little path, part of it is paved and a lot of it is dirt, people have thrown out all kinds of things. And I got to thinking about what are some of the things that we throw out? Maybe we need to throw out in this second half of life journey. So one of the things that I've encountered along the way is things that people have thoughtlessly just tossed out the window. So styrofoam cups and plastic bags and a lot of other little things that I think, come on, don't throw these out the window. You're cluttering up the environment for the rest of us. And then we are the ones that have to pick up the crap. And I thought, what are some things maybe that I have thoughtlessly thrown out in my past that I need to maybe reconsider whether I should throw that out or not? Now, I have a pretty strong personality, and I can think back in my life when I threw out some words and some thoughts and the way things should be that really were not only not necessary to throw out, but I threw them out and somebody else had to deal with the crap. And so I'm looking at my life now and thinking, when I respond to somebody or a situation, what am I throwing out? Am I throwing out something that can be useful? Is it something that I need to change my tone of voice, my words, whether I need to throw it out at all? So that's some thoughts that came on throwing things out that I just throw out thoughtlessly. And I want to be more thoughtful, more mindful about the way I'm throwing things out these days. The second thing I came across that I thought, it was a cooler. Now, there was no lid on the cooler anymore. And so somebody had very intentionally tossed it off their pickup truck or whatever. Somehow, way out in the boonies, there's this cooler that doesn't have a top, and so it's not useful anymore. So, like the cooler, sometimes there's things that really are no longer useful, and we need to dispose of them carefully. Well, sometimes some of our old paradigms and the way we thought and the way we acted just aren't useful anymore. Now, other people, it may work for them, but maybe it no longer works for you. One of my paradigms in first half of life, which I think is a good way to be, especially in first half of life, and for some it works long into second half of life as well. But this was the thought, that if I'm going to attend a church, I am going to be wholly invested in one church. That's where I'm going to pour my energies. I'm going to become a member. I'm going to be active in that church, one church, because, that's the way it should be. Well, as I've moved into second half of life, that paradigm, that truth, no longer is working for me. So instead of being a part of one church, I'm actually a part of 3 churches for different reasons. One church, my husband and I enjoy going to because the ambiance is very uptown. It's just a cool meeting space, and the pastor, when he speaks on many different levels, and he always challenges us with how we're living our life in light of the scripture that he's talking about. And it's delightful and encouraging and challenging. Also, we drive there with my brother and sister-in-law, so on the way there, on the way home, we talk about some of these concepts, and so it's very encouraging. So we enjoy going to that church on Sunday morning. The problem with that church, though, is that it's a 45-minute drive. So getting to know people with just going on Sunday, it just doesn't work. That's not going to be a primary community for me. So it's good on one hand, but it's not fulfilling one of my other needs. So there is a church that is in town that's close to us, only a 10-minute drive, and I really like that church. They're very environmentally conscious, and so I like a lot of their social emphasis. But what we've done is we've joined one of their small groups, and it's been great to get to know people really personally. And then there's a third church. So we attend one of the Sunday schools of the church. It's called a Sunday school. The curious thing is that it's made up of people who have largely left the church, and many of them have left Christianity. So, but they're very educated, and we often have very stimulating discussions there. And because I'm still something of a believer, I like to poke them. I like to go and just make some rash statements and see what they do with them. And then they challenge me as well, but they accept me where I'm at. And so that's a third church that I'm involved in. So that idea that I should be involved in one and one only church, that worked for me in first half of life. But in second half of life, I've had to let go of that. And with it, the guilt. Oh no, you aren't going to the same church this week that you went to last week. Oh no, what's going to happen? Well, I never did believe that going to church made me a Christian anymore. Going to McDonald's made me a hamburger. But still, there was a little bit of guilt to get over that paradigm that I had so accepted in first half of life, that I should only be involved in one church. And part of my transition into second half of life was also spiritual. How I was perceiving God, how I thought the ground of all being was involved in my life, how I would respond to the universe, whatever your concept is of God. that began to change too. And so what I needed at a church was different than what I needed in first half of life. And I had to be okay with that. I had to accept that change in myself and then live that out in the way that felt right for me. And so I have to accept that and deal with the old tapes, the old narratives that say this is the way it should be. So I wonder, what sacred paradigms have you had to adjust and maybe change and maybe say this is no longer useful anymore and I need to throw it out? I don't need to tell everybody else that they are wrong, but for myself, how do I need to live that out? Now, the third thing I came across as I was walking Jerbiloo Circle is an old fence that had kind of got trampled down and twisted. And I thought, you know what? It's metal. It could be very useful. We could straighten out that fence and use it to enclose something else. So sometimes we throw things away that actually could be useful, but they need to be straightened out. They need to be reappropriated. They might take on a little different shape than they did before. One example of this in my life was that in first half of life, I really enjoyed teaching and training. And mostly I was working with pastors. I was training them how to be coaches. And I really enjoyed that work. And then once I retired from that, I thought, how does that desire to use those gifts and talents, which people really affirmed in first half of life, in many ways, including financially, how can that be maybe reformulated in a different way? Now, one of the things I started a couple of businesses in my life, and one of the things I've recognized in my life is that I don't like to advertise myself. I don't like to do the promotional work for starting businesses. So none of my businesses really took off very well. So the idea of going around to different organizations and saying, hey, I have something to share, would you give me a platform? Just didn't sit well with me. I just didn't want to do that at all. So one of the ways that I reformulated that was to start some small groups. So I love small groups. Small groups have been a part of my life in a regular way forever. And I think for me, small groups is where we really get face to face and we can talk honestly about ourselves and our lives. We can get support from each other and encouragement and even challenge in a loving way from others. So I decided I was going to start a second half of life group. In this case, I invited women to be a part of it. And it was very life-giving. I could do a little bit of teaching in terms of what I've discovered about second half of life and how we negotiate all the changes in second half of life. And then I could also use my skills as a coach, and I could ask questions and saying, how are you dealing with this? What happened when you did that? And hear their answers and learn from them, as well as encourage them to stay on the journey. So that was one way that I took that skill of teaching and training and took it into a different arena, but was still able to use that. Also, that's why I'm here on YouTube, because I thought this is a great platform where I can share some of the things that I've learned and hopefully create something of a community where we can share our journeys together and encourage each other to stay on the journey. So how about you? What are some things that you really enjoyed doing in first half of life that maybe now you kind of miss and you wish that you could not go back and do what you did, but those gifts and abilities are still there and they're still longing to be used? What are some things that you could clarify, that you could say, how can I reuse this? How can I reappropriate this that I thought was thrown away and yet now has a new life in this further journey? I hope this video has maybe stimulated some thoughts or some questions in you about your journey. Write them in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. I want to respond to comments as much as I can. And of course, if you found it valuable, share it with your friends, like it, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes, because we've got a lot of things to talk about. So come on, let's go on this journey together.